Greetings, everyone. We're recording this in our new base medrash. People eating breakfast in the background. New base medrash in 125 Cedarhurst Avenue. We're partnering with Beis Midrash Hachaim Vashalom, and that's where we're doing our shiurim from. That's where we're recording from. Anyways, we continue our discussion right now as to what would, according to the Rambam, what would qualify to count in the list of Tariag Mitzvos. So he has 14 principles. We're up to the third of the 14, and that is that we can only count in the count of the Tariag Mitzvos, mitzvah hanoheges l'doros, a mitzvah that is meant for all time now, which needs to be qualified. Which needs to be qualified. What does it mean forever? Now, first of all, why does it have to be that way? Like, why a mitzvah that Am Yisrael was commanded to do in the desert, let's say something special, for that generation, why cannot that not be counted in the Tariag mitzvahs that the Rambam says? Because it's not called Torah. It's not called, because Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kilas Yaakov. The Torah is called a inheritance. Yerusha ein la hefsek. A inheritance just keeps on going. If it's not depleted, if you have a astronomical fortune, it'll keep on passing from generation to generation to generation. So Torah is called morasha. It's called a inheritance, and Yerusha ein la hefsek. It doesn't stop. So Torah it has to be for all times. So it's just very interesting that what the Rambam says qualifies halachically as a mitzvah also fits with his tenets of the Yud Gimel in the Yud Gimel Ikrim, his tenets of faith, that Torah is not ever going to be changed. The Torah will never be changed. So it's very interesting that this is where we find a crossover between Yud Gimel Ikrim and the Yud Dalet Shorashim. That just like in the Ikrim, we have to believe Torah will never change. So also when seeking what directives to count in the list of the Tariag mitzvahs, we have to be one which is noeg l'doros. It's for all time. It's never going to change. Now, it's very interesting. The question that people ask on the one is what they ask on the other. Right? So people have asked, well, don't Chazal say that in the future we will not keep mitzvahs, right? Mitzvahs betelos lasid level, right? So if they ask us on the Yud Gimel Ikrim, it's going to come a time where we don't do mitzvahs anymore. Right? So how do you say Torah won't change? Now the truth is, we already had in this series we dealt with that question as far as explaining how we shifted from being B'nai Noach to being B'nai Yisrael, having only 7 mitzvahs to having Tariag mitzvahs. We actually dealt with this question, and the answer here is actually very similar, but they're slightly nuanced, slightly differently. Let's copy this question over, to the 14 Shorashim, this third Shorash. All right, the Rambam counts in his list of the Tariag mitzvahs many mitzvahs that we say in this day and age don't apply because it's when we're in exile. Sadly, a lot of mitzvahs fell out of our ability to uphold, and we're not even obligating them if we're not sovereign in our own nation. And the Rambam counts many of these mitzvahs that we simply cannot do in this day and age, and many of them we're not even obligated to do, like the mitzvahs hatzluyas ba'aretz, right? Many of the mitzvahs of that we do in Eretz Yisrael, they're only when most Jews are sitting on the land of Israel, which is sadly not the case. And the Rambam counts his list of Tariag B'Oimid. There are times when with these mitzvahs don't apply, and yet the Rambam counts us. So it's not literally that it's for all times. right? And you also take into account what we said over there that mitzvahs b'teles love. Also, there really is no such thing as a mitzvah for all time. Mitzvahs are going to be annulled in the future. Right. So these are the questions they asked. Now, people are unaware that the Rambam actually responded to this question in a supplementary note he makes in the positive commandment to wipe out the 7 nations. Right, it's one of the positive commandments that we have to, the 7 nations occupy the land of Israel have to be vanquished. So the Rambam paskins that this mitzvah no longer applies ever again because kvar avad zichram, as he writes in Perek Evos Bachim, they've already been obliterated. Because since these nations have assimilated with the other nations of the world, it's not called that they exist anymore for us to obliterate. So the mitzvah has fallen out of use, not even just temporarily, but permanently. And yet the Ram counts in his mitzvah of the Taryag, and he only counts mitzvah noheges l'daros. So he actually responds to this by that mitzvah of obliterating the Sheva Amamin, and he says that when I said in my Shorashim that I'm only counting a mitzvah hanoheges l'daros, mitzvah that's for all times, I meant to say that there was never a pre-instated time limit on the mitzvah. There was never a time limit. And that the mitzvah is only for 20 days. The mitzvah is only for 20 years. Right? That's all I meant. I meant that there's no time limit on the mitzvah. That's all I meant. That this mitzvah applies so long as it's applicable. So like in the case of killing out the 7 nations, if you finish the job early before the 6,000 years of this world are up, right? Good for you. You finished early. So just because you finished the job that you were commanded to do early doesn't mean that the mitzvah wasn't for all generations. Yes, it was in essence for all generations, because anytime you have any of them left, we got to kill them out. So it is in essence for all generations. Just if you finish the job early, right, which you should be so lucky. Right? It's not called that the mitzvah, therefore, is not for all generations, because there was never a time limit on it. Kill them out wherever you find them. That's all. And that's all he means. But if the job gets done and therefore the mitzvah no longer applies, and Ram adds over there, by the wayside, do you think when we finally get rid of Amalek, that it'll be called that the mitzvah of destroying Amalek wasn't for all generations? Which, that's another discussion that we have a shir on, that there's a difference between Amalek, even though they are intermarried with all the other nations, and the Shiva Amamin, that Amalek is still out there despite being intermarried. The Rambam is saying, actually black on white, the 7 nations, once they're intermarried, they're not out there. But both are called the mitzvah noheges l'daros, even though we finished the mitzvah of wiping out the 7 Amin before the end of history. And with Amalek, we should be so lucky to finish the job quickly, but won't be called that if we finished the job at a time that it wasn't for all generations, because there's never a time limit on it. Just saying, with no time constraints, just do this job. But if you finish the job, okay, so it's not called that it wasn't for forever, because there's never a time limit on it. And I think this is clear. This is what the Rambam says. And, we could use this Ram to also understand, if you say mitzvahs are annulled in the future, mitzvah tes lavo, which the Rambam definitely believes for a very simple reason. Eventually, we're going to all go to Olam Haba, and there's no mitzvahs to do there because there's no body there, no body as we know it. Right? So the Rambam definitely believes that Chazal. And in fact, the Rambam even talks about, we mentioned this series, that in the future, we're going to stop learning Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Right now, it's part of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, is to learn Nevi'im, according to the Rambam again, is to learn Nevi'im and Ksuvim also, not just Chumash. But Rambam says, Los Lavo, it's only going to be Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Megillas Esther. It's going to be the whole entirety of Tanakh. Right? But the answer is the same. Right? When the job gets done, it's not called that the mitzvah was not for forever, because it was never not for forever means there was a time limit on the mitzvah to begin with. If there's no time limit, it perfectly qualifies. So now we mentioned the mitzvahs that sadly don't apply in this day and age, right? Like the mitzvah tulis, right? It's still in the Rambam's count, because it's not that there was a time limit on these mitzvahs. Sadly, the criteria that need to be in place to obligate us, those criteria are missing. But it's not a time limit on the mitzvah. The mitzvah is only from this date until that date. There's just some mitzvahs, sadly, are only rabbinic in this day and age, or don't even apply at all, because some of the criteria is missing, not because there's a time limit on the mitzvah, right? Right. So and the same thing goes in the big picture, right? All mitzvahs are there to accomplish an objective of making tikkun, of ridding the world of evil, some manifestation of evil, right? When all evil will be wiped off the face of the earth. Yeah, so mitzvahs won't apply anymore, right? But it's not because there's a time limit on mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are forever, right? But the mitzvahs are to do a job. If the job is finished, the job is finished. If we rid the world of evil, right? It's not called that the mitzvah was not for forever. It just means that you finished the job. Not for forever means that there was always a time limit on the mitzvah. It was only from this date until that date, right? But if it's not dated, the mitzvah is not timed, right? It's just that the mitzvah is to accomplish an objective, right? It means so if you finish your objective early, so good, and in the future we will accomplish the objective of all mitzvahs. Right, and the objective of all mitzvahs is to rid the world of evil, so it won't be any more mitzvahs to do because the job will have been done. But we will have mitzvahs so long as the job is to be done, if it's theoretically, if it'll stretch 1,000,000 years, right? If it'll stretch 10 million years, right? Just we have a oral tradition that we'll get the job done by the year 6,000. By the year 6,000, the job will be done. But it's just that the job will be done, not that there's a time limit on mitzvahs. Now, of course, just once we referenced the idea, right, of Torah being forever, that we have to believe that Torah is forever. Torah will never change, right? So getting the job done doesn't mean the Torah changed. The world changed, but the Torah changed. The Torah says, this is the job. You must keep on doing the job so long as the job exists, as long as the need for the job exists. Keep on doing it, keep on doing it, keep on doing it, right? So, there's another angle to it, that since the Torah was said in that manner, that so long as the job exists, do it, there's also wisdom there. If it's a temporary injunction, it was an emergency procedure for that temporary time that it was mandated. But if it's so, as long as it takes, even if it takes forever, as long as that means there's like eternal wisdom there. So that's another aspect of the eternality of Torah, that the wisdom of Torah, right, called the pnimius, the tamei mitzvah, they will always be relevant. So even if the physical job will be accomplished, and therefore there won't be any more work to do because it's been done already. We finished, not because the mitzvah was expired and it was only for a certain time. No, it wasn't for a certain time. It was to get a job done. And once the job done, there's no more work to be done. But since the wisdom behind the mitzvah was as such that this is, even if it takes 1,000,000 years, so long as this job exists, do it. So that means there's some eternal wisdom there. So even if the job is not need to be done anymore, but the wisdom behind the job is what we're going to be contemplating in Olam Haba. So that's another aspect of the eternality of Torah, that even if the job aspect will not expire, never expires, the job aspect will get done, right? And that's why it won't be done from that point further, because it was done already, right? Not because there was ever a time limit, but since it is as such that even 10 million years from now, if this need arises, take care of it. So it means there's eternal wisdom there, and that eternal wisdom is what we contemplate in Olam Haba. So the Iris, the divine lights and the divine reasoning in Torah is literally eternal. Literally eternal. The job is that we count our mitzvahs is technically eternal, meaning so long as this job exists or ever crops up again, get it done. But there will come a time where it will be a job well done, and we won't be doing it anymore. All right, this is very clear. All right, and this is to get straight. This is what the Rambam meant. That way, you cannot count a mitzvah that was temporary by inception. It always had a time limit on it. It has to be a mitzvah without time limit, but even though eventually it will be that the mitzvah may not be done in the future because the job was done already, but that's also called, that's technically eternal mitzvah. So long as the job exists, even 10 million years from now, if it'll exist then, you got to do that job. Right? You just don't count a mitzvah that by inception was only for a certain amount of time. Right? That doesn't qualify to be called Torah. And you understand also that the divine wisdom in that temporary injunction is not the same like the Torah. It's not an eternal message. It was just for a certain circumstance that existed from this date to that date. Suppose the Torah has timeless truths. If the job side of it is, that so long as this job will ever exist, you have to get this job done. Okay? That's the Rambam's third principle, right? And therefore, you're right. And that's what he means. So if the Rambam, it doesn't count a mitzvah, it doesn't mean that the mitzvah, was necessarily not eternal. Some mitzvahs also he counts, right? I should say like this: any mitzvah the Rambam counts, even if they are not nogeya in this day and age, right? It's still called it there forever, because the reason why they're not nogeya in this day and age is simply because the criteria that obligate us are not all in place. But there was never a time limit on those mitzvahs, and therefore the Rambam will count them. Okay, the fourth principle is that the Rambam says not to count mitzvahs that are inclusive of the entirety of Torah. Now, what does that mean? Mitzvahs that are inclusive of the entirety of Torah? There are mitzvahs that just say kedoshim to you. This is Rambam's own example. Be holy. That according to the Rambam, it doesn't obligate you in anything specific. It's telling you to uphold the mitzvahs. A command that repeats itself like be frum, be religious, which includes, by the way, do tshuva, right? Since it's not adding anything, it's just telling you keep the Torah. It cannot be counted as a separate mitzvah, right? It's just you're being encouraged to stick with it. Right, and excuse me, to stick with it, and uphold the law. Now, these things could be called meta mitzvahs because it's basically, of course, God has commanded you keep my Torah, but it's not commanding anything specific, right? So these 630 mitzvahs, everything it's a new specific obligation that is not included in something that we are already previously obligated. It's 613 specific separate obligations, separate files, really, as we were explaining. 613 separate files, right? But say, keep the Torah. It's not machayev, anything specific. They're just saying, be from, which by the way includes, this is why the Rambam doesn't count, as a mitzvah to do tshuva. To do tshuva is just to uphold the law. It's not anything new or specific, right? Because you violated the law, you should be have a license to not keep the law. Because you violated it once, you could violate it twice. And we have a whole other shir on this, why the Rambam doesn't count tshuva as a mitzvah. But it goes back to this point, right? It's not anything specific. Your obligation to tshuva falls into your general obligation to keep Torah. Because why? Because you broke the Torah once, you can break the Torah twice. So, of course, the original obligation to uphold the Torah, right, kicks in, or never went away, I should rather say, right? It never went away just because you violated the Torah once. And that's why tshuva is not counted as a separate mitzvah. Right? It's just it is your pre-existing obligation to uphold the law, which applies equally to all the 613 mitzvahs. It's not obligating you in anything specific, right? So the Rambam's review, you don't count something that's inclusive of the whole Torah. He means to say you don't count all these many psukim which tell you keep the law, be holy, serve God, because it's just telling you keep the Torah. right? And the 630 things are 600 specific folders that are not included within each other. 613 separate folders. Each one is its own separate obligation. Right? You like the din of our base medrash. It's great to move to a populated base medrash. I know the noise is a little bit distracting, but it's great to have a base medrash of our own. We like to thank your congregation, Chaim V'Shalom, allowing us to partner with them and run Yeshivas Evan Shasia on their premises. And please tell all your friends we're accepting applications, for to come and join us for the summer Zman after Pesach. We will be officially opening our doors, and we have a great base medrash, great Otzar Svarim, dining room and dorms, the whole business. Right? Anyway, so I know this is the. Trev, you have to put up with the din of a base medrash in the background. Okay, anyways. But getting back to our point, right? You do not count the obligation to keep the Torah as a separate mitzvah. He goes, it's just saying uphold the Torah. It's 613 separate files. Each one is specifically obligating something that you are not already obligated to do by either the files that we count before it or the files that we count after it. But keep the Torah, that doesn't count as a separate mitzvah. It's just your general obligation, uphold the law. And tshuva, right, falls within that. Tshuva, what is tshuva? Tshuva is to go back to keeping God's law, which was the same original obligation to uphold God's law. All right, but maybe that requires another lecture to explain it. But I think it should be plainly simple enough. And the Rambam indeed, went out of his way to respond to this. He says, I count the mitzvah to serve God, to daven. Well, isn't the whole Torah about serving God? The fifth mitzvah say. But he says, no, but this fifth mitzvah, a list of the Taryag, his fifth mitzvah of La'avda, to serve God, which means daven, it obligates something specific. Not just the general obligation to serve God, which we serve God with all our 613 mitzvahs. It obligates something specific, which is tefillah. That the Rambam is a Rishon that holds that one is obligated, biblically obligated to daven every day. Every day. Is it once a day, or it's just a constant, never-ceasing mitzvah to pray to Hashem? So that's something specific. La'avdo, the mitzvah serve God, is not a general mitzvah, which you say, well, isn't that to keep all 600 mitzvahs? No, it is it has the specificity of obligating us in the mitzvah of tefillah. All right, I did not come prepared. So the fighting with the din of the base medrash. Maybe we have to find a private room in our building here to do these online recordings. But I'm really glad, at least I have the happy problem of having the background noise that's a little bit distracting at this point. So we will end this particular installment here. Thank you very much.